I asked my husband for time to rediscover myself, and I gave myself to a night of pleasures with 7 men. When I tried to come back, my husband had replaced me with someone better and humiliated me. My name is Raphaela. I am 27 years old. I am a recently graduated nurse, and I live in the interior of Mexico, in the region of San Luis Potosí. My story with Daniel, now 29 years old, began when I was only 17 years old. He was one of those guys who always seemed older, too mature for the boys at the technical school. We met in a computer class, where he helped me connect an old USB drive that, I would swear, was doomed. After that, he started waiting for me after school, and soon we became inseparable. Our relationship lasted for the rest of school and went through all the ups and downs of youth, as if we were united by an invisible elastic band. We grew up together. Daniel has always been methodical and down-to-earth. He got a job as a municipal traffic guard right after finishing technical school. His father, a supervisor in the sector, helped him get the job. With that and a loan, he bought a simple little house in a quiet neighborhood where all the neighbors still greet each other with good morning and water their plants in the evening. I, on the other hand, was still studying nursing full-time, struggling to pay for transportation and books. But Daniel said he believed in me, and that was enough for me. We saw ourselves as a team. After a while, we decided to share a small apartment closer to my university. We had a mattress on the floor, an old television inherited from his grandmother, and 2 plates. But back then, it seemed like a luxury. I was doing my internship at the city hospital and would come home exhausted, but happy to see him preparing chicken and rice or laughing at some silly series. He said that one day we would build something bigger, but that the foundation was us. I believed him. In fact, it never occurred to me to doubt it. The problem is that in reality, I had never stopped to think about what I wanted for myself. Over time, I realized that I was living on autopilot. Everything I did, my exhausting shifts at the hospital, my weekends at home, even my wedding plans, revolved around us. I no longer knew what was my choice and what was a convention. It was as if my life had been decided for me, step by step, and I had simply obeyed. When my friends told me about trips, drunken nights, unthinkable mistakes, and meaningless adventures, I could only smile. I had never been one of those people. I had always been the one who had everything figured out. But did I? We had such a predictable routine that any change seemed almost a heresy. Daniel had lunch at 2 in the afternoon, watched the news at 7 in the evening, and went to bed before 10 at night. On Sundays, he visited his parents. I fit into that mold, and it did not bother me until I started to feel stuck. I began to realize that my desires always adapted to his. If I wanted to go out, he wanted to rest. If I wanted to travel, he said we did not have money. And I gave in, always. A part of me said that this was normal in a couple. The other part began to wonder who I was, besides being Daniel's girlfriend. I remember exactly the day I sat on the kitchen floor, watching the rice boil, and I thought, do I really love this life, or have I just gotten used to it? It was as if something inside me had been activated, something I could not turn off afterwards. That same night, I sent a message to Mireille, my best friend from high school. Do you think it is normal to have never experienced anything outside of a relationship? She responded with a long audio, full of pauses, saying that one day the bill comes, that you cannot truly love someone if you have never loved yourself. That resonated in my mind for days. And so began what I now call the beginning of the end. Not because Daniel had done anything wrong. He was constant, honest, present. But maybe that was the problem. Everything was in its place except me. The restlessness that was growing inside me was silent but deep. I started looking for excuses to go out alone, spend more time at the university, or sleep at Mireille's house. I felt guilty, but I also felt a freedom that I had never felt before, as if the world had many doors and I had spent my whole life in just one. I did not want to cheat, not yet, but a part of me wanted to run away from everything that started as a slight restlessness, became an insistent voice in my head. I would wake up in the middle of the night with my chest tight, as if something was wrong, even though everything seemed to be in its place. I would look to the side and there was Daniel, snoring softly, with his hand on my hip, and I felt trapped. It was cruel to think that about someone so good, but the truth is that I no longer knew who Raphaela was, the woman who grew up with a single man, who never doubted, who never made mistakes on her own. I was never free. I was always an us. I started walking more alone after my shifts. I would go up the university stairs without rushing, just so I would not have to go straight home. Once, I went into a bar near the hospital alone. I ordered a beer and I stayed there, watching people as if I were on another planet. I saw a girl laughing with a stranger, exchanging flirtatious glances. I felt envy, not of her exactly, but of her lightness. I never had that phase of living what is called the single life. My first kiss was with Daniel, my first sex, my first everything. That started to scare me more than I was willing to admit. It was a Friday morning when I broke down. Raphaela and I were on the couch in her apartment, drinking cheap tequila with lime and talking about life. She was always freer than me. She had had 3 serious relationships and several flings. When I told her about my desire to take a break, she put down her glass and looked at me seriously. "Have you never wanted to know who you would be without him?" she asked. I did not answer right away. Then she added, almost like a prophecy, "Leave before life forces you to." That sentence hit me like a silent shot. It was the beginning of the decision that would change everything. After that night, I spent days trying to carry on as if nothing had changed. I made coffee, folded clothes, kissed Daniel before going to work, but inside me, something had already broken. I could no longer look at him in the same way, and that made me feel like the worst person in the world. It was not a lack of love, it was a lack of myself. I started to think about what my life would be like if I had met other people, had other experiences, made reckless decisions. It ate at me, and no matter how much I tried to suppress this feeling, it only grew. There was something inside me that was crying out for a change. I tried to rationalize, to convince myself that I was exaggerating, that every long-term relationship goes through phases like this. But when I saw my friends living new, passionate, and free stories, I felt a kind of envy that shamed me. I started to wonder, what if I am wasting my youth? What if I wake up in 10 years with children, bills, and a house in the same neighborhood, and I realize that I was never really happy? This doubt became a slow poison. And although Daniel did not realize it yet, that us had already cracked. It was no longer about betrayal, but about identity. And the more I tried to hold on to the good memories, the more distant they seemed. Daniel had not changed. It was I who had changed. And I hated that. I hated having doubts. I hated thinking about other men. I hated the feeling of wasting a beautiful story. But I also hated the silence inside me, the lack of options, the lack of mistakes. I did not just want to live, I wanted to live for myself. And that, I knew, could not happen while being with him. It was then that I began to plan the conversation. I practiced it in front of the mirror. I practiced every sentence, but nothing prepared me for the real pain of saying, "I need time." That night fell like a dull thunder. I had rehearsed every word, but when I sat down in front of Daniel, it all went out of my head. He was on the couch, tired after his shift, with his shoes still on and his uniform wrinkled. I sat next to him with sweaty hands and a racing heart. "We need to talk," was what came out of my mouth. He sat up immediately, as if expecting the worst. I think deep down he already sensed that something was different. The distance that was growing between us could no longer be ignored. And at that moment, everything began to fall apart. I explained as best I could. I said it was not about him, that I needed time to understand who I was, what I wanted. I asked for 3 months to breathe, to think. Daniel looked at me as if he did not recognize me, at first in silence, then confused, and finally hurt. "What are you looking for, Raphaela?" "Sex with someone else?" he asked, his voice breaking. I quickly denied it, but he knew the wound was deeper. He begged us to try together. He said we could rediscover things, travel, change our routine. But I had already made up my mind. It was now or never. Technically, it was not an official breakup. It was a timeout, as if it were possible to pause life without breaking a heart. I took some clothes, my hospital gown, and went to Mireille's house. She already had everything ready: a bottle of tequila, 2 glasses, a lively playlist. She tried to distract me, to remind me that this was about freedom, about rediscovery. But that first night, even surrounded by noise and music, I slept poorly. I tossed and turned on my makeshift bed, listening to the laughter coming from the living room. Something inside me already knew. This was not a breakup. It was the beginning of the end for both of us. In the following days, I forced myself to believe that I had done the right thing. I started wearing dark lipstick again, like in my teenage years. Mireille took me to a new bar where no one knew me. I danced with strangers, drank too many shots, and stumbled home. That was what I wanted, right? To live? To be free? But the feeling growing inside me was not euphoria, it was a feeling of not fitting in. I looked around and felt out of place, as if I had invaded a life that did not belong to me. Daniel did not call me, did not write to me, did not beg me. That hurt more than any scream. A part of me expected him to knock on the door, to show up at the hospital, to tell me he forgave me and would wait. But Daniel, unlike me, knew the weight of what I had asked for and respected it. Letting me go was his way of showing me love. Or perhaps the beginning of his own grief. I did not know. I only felt his silence as a deafening absence. And Mireille tried to fill that void with loud music and phrases like, "You did the right thing. You deserve more. This will pass." But not even she fully believed it. There was something in my face that I could not hide. One morning, I woke up with the taste of cigarettes in my throat and makeup smeared down to my eyebrows. Mireille was still asleep, sprawled on the couch, with background music playing endlessly. I looked around and wondered, is this the end? Is this the new beginning? I went out barefoot into the building's hallway just to breathe fresh air. And as the sun hit my face, I realized what I did not want to admit. I was not trying to find who I was trying to lose myself, once and for all. But still, I was not ready to go back. And maybe, deep down, I did not even know how to go back anymore. The first few weeks were a roller coaster of euphoria and denial. Mireille and I were experiencing what she called the resurrection of the single girls. Every day was a different bar, every Friday a promise of liberation. I changed clothes 5 times before going out, trying on versions of myself I had never dared to be: miniskirt, wine-colored lipstick, high heels. Mireille said my look was wilder. In front of the mirror, I pretended to agree. But a minute of silence, a second in the bathroom with the door closed, was enough for the truth to escape from my eyes. I did not recognize myself. The dates began. Apps, clubs, hospital colleagues. Compliments came easily to me, as did kisses. A guy with light eyes and a piercing in his eyebrow took me to a themed motel downtown. I felt like I was in a sleazy movie. Another called me a goody two-shoes letting loose, and I laughed, pretending that was exactly it. Mireille celebrated each achievement as if they were trophies. She kept names on a list on her phone, saying I was becoming a legend. But for me, each new body left a growing trail of emptiness. It was as if I were being erased little by little. During one of those encounters, I had sex with a guy whose name I do not even remember. He was a waiter at a bar where Mireille knew everyone. After he fell asleep, snoring beside me, I went to the bathroom and cried in silence, sitting on the cold floor, smelling the sour scent of the face towel and trying not to vomit. The sex had been mechanical, almost automatic, without connection, without passion. Just a desperate attempt to prove that I still had something to discover. I washed my face, looked in the mirror, and lied to myself, "You are alive." But the truth was that yes, I was destroying myself with style. It was any given night, one of those that start with a bottle of tequila and end without knowing where your soul went. Mireille showed up with an invitation, a party in an apartment of acquaintances downtown. I did not even ask who they were. I was too numb to my own decisions to care. We got into an Uber, laughing our heads off, with too much makeup, too provocative. In my bag, I only had lipstick, gum, and a condom that, honestly, I did not even know if I would use again. I wanted to lose myself, and that night I succeeded in a way that has marked me to this day. The apartment was narrow, suffocating, and full of men, 7 to be exact, faces I could not distinguish well between the smoke and the loud music. Mirela already knew some of them and greeted them as if it were routine. I followed her, half dazed, half numb. We drank what they gave us, we laughed too loud. At a certain point, the bodies began to mix as if the world were melting. It was like being in the middle of a whirlwind, without beginning or end. And although I could see everything from the outside, I remained there, in the center of the chaos, as if that were the price of so much freedom. It all happened right there, in that same space, like a sequence of unscripted scenes. Mirela and I were in the middle of them, laughing, moaning, passing out, and coming back. There was no affection, no names, no guilt yet. Just pure adrenaline, desperation disguised as audacity. Each one took us as they pleased, more than once, without pause, without protection, without thinking. Mirela said that was what made us free, but none of it felt liberating. It was as if we were being devoured, inside and out. I did not feel pleasure. I felt vertigo and shame, too much shame. When it was all over, the floor was covered with empty bottles, scattered clothes, and dispersed laughter. Mirela was sleeping on the couch, laughing with one of the guys on her chest. I went to the bathroom, breathing heavily, with trembling legs and a shattered soul. I sat on the edge of the bathtub and stared at myself. My eyes were red, my makeup was smeared, my body was marked. I washed my face with cold water, but nothing could clean me from the inside. For the first time, I felt real disgust for myself. Not for what I had done, but for having done it. I needed that to try to feel something, and still, I remained empty. I went back to the room and saw 2 of them sleeping in the same bed I had been in minutes before. The smell of sweat, cigarettes, and alcohol clung to my skin. I got dressed in silence and went out onto the balcony. It was almost morning. The sky was beginning to lighten and, with it, my conscience. I knew I had gone too far, that night was not just a mistake, but a cry for help. Mirela believed we had everything under control, but I just felt like we had completely lost our way. I wondered if I would be remembered as a fling or as a hole I would never fully climb out of. That morning, I understood that there were no more excuses. I was not a woman living her freedom, I was a woman trying to disappear into her own skin. When we got back to the apartment, Mirela laughed about everything as if it were a story to save. I did not answer. I remained silent the rest of the day. With every ignored message from Daniel, with every memory of our life together, I felt like I had thrown it all away. And now I was crawling among the pieces, begging for a version of myself that no longer existed. And the worst part is that from the outside, everything seemed perfect. My stories were full of laughter, colorful drinks, and exaggeratedly filtered selfies. My colleagues at the hospital commented that I was different, more relaxed. Some friends said they envied me, but no one saw the moments when I stood in the dark, staring at the ceiling with a broken heart. I thought about Daniel more than I was willing to admit. I thought about how he folded his socks, about his silly laugh when watching cat videos, about our late-night conversations. But instead of facing it, I submerged myself in distractions. Mirela was determined to transform me. She said it was my butterfly phase, that I would soon understand what it was to fly. She took me to parties where I knew no one. She filled my glass without asking. She dragged me to dance with men who barely knew my name. I smiled. I pretended to be in control, but inside me, the chaos was growing. I no longer knew what was desire and what was guilt. I began to confuse freedom with anesthesia. Every decision seemed to take me further away from who I had been and from what was still left of me. It was one of those nights, as I was walking home with my heels in my hands and my makeup smeared, that it really hit me. We were in the back seat of an Uber, and Mirela was talking excitedly about the after party. I stared out the window, with a knot in my stomach. When we got to the apartment, she ran to the bathroom, and I stood there, in the hallway. I took my phone out of my purse and opened the video gallery without thinking. I searched until I found one where Daniel is filming me dancing clumsily in the kitchen. He laughs, calls me my uncoordinated love, and then sings a cheesy song while looking at the camera. The last line, "If you leave, I will wait for you, but do not be long, okay?" That was it. It destroyed me. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, one of those where time seems to drag on purpose. Mirela was getting ready in her room, choosing the tightest top she could find, and I was on the couch with my phone in my hand and my mind elsewhere. I opened the old photo gallery and, without meaning to, I played a video of Daniel in worn-out shorts and a singing voice, singing in the kitchen. He turned to the camera, laughed at his mistake, and said, "If you leave, I will wait for you, but do not be long, okay?" That sentence punched me in the stomach. I put down my phone and went straight to the bathroom, locking the pain in the cold tiles. I cried softly, like someone who no longer had the right to suffer. I left. He stayed. And still, he waited for me. Or at least, he waited for me to know. Because until that moment, I still believed that Daniel was frozen in time, waiting for me like a living statue of unconditional love. I had not heard anything about his life since I left. He did not call me, he did not send me messages, he did not comment on social media. A silence that for me was absence, but maybe for him was just release. A few days later, everything fell apart. I was in my room, wrapped in a blanket, with my stomach churning and my eyes red. Mirela came back from a night of partying, excited, and told me an anecdote about a mutual acquaintance. It was a party in a park with live music and people smiling. In the middle of the recording, a familiar face took my breath away. Daniel, in a white t-shirt and a glass in his hand, next to a thin, blonde woman in an emerald green dress that caught my eye. She had her head resting on his shoulder. He was smiling, calm, happy, very happy. I enlarged the image, as if looking for a mistake, a detail, a sign that it was all just an act. But it was not. That woman occupied the place that was once mine. And the worst part, she seemed to fit in perfectly. The way he leaned slightly towards her, the way he smiled out of the corner of his eye, was the kind of gesture he only made when he felt comfortable. It was not a social smile, it was peace. And that destroyed me more than any betrayal, because there, for the first time, I understood that Daniel was no longer waiting for me. I stood there, for a few minutes. Mirela, next to me, said something like, "You followed me too, right?" But it was not true. I was busy getting lost while he, apparently, was rebuilding himself. I wanted to feel rage, but I only felt a suffocating oppression. The idea that maybe he was better off without me was choking me. I started to question everything. What if he had found someone who valued him from the beginning, someone who would not put him on hold? The reality hurt me because it was not unfair, it was too fair. That night, for the first time, I wanted to go back. I wanted to go back with urgency, with desperation. Because there, seeing the image of Daniel smiling with another woman, I realized that maybe I had lost something that would never come back. It was not just about love, it was about recognition, about regret, about ego. I took my cell phone and wrote, "Can we talk?" My heart sped up when he replied almost immediately, "Tell me when." And there, in the middle of the silence of the room, with Mirela singing at the top of her lungs in the shower, I knew the fall was not over yet. The next morning, I chose my outfit like an armor, the tight, strapless wine-colored dress that Daniel always complimented. I carefully painted my lips, I fixed my loose hair, I tried to look confident, but my hands were shaking. I arranged to meet at a cafe far from the center, a discreet place we used to go to when we wanted to escape the world. I arrived half an hour early. I ordered a coffee that went cold without being touched. My heart pounded every time the door opened. When he finally came in, I was breathless. Daniel was different, more mature, more confident, and infinitely more distant. He was wearing a light blue shirt, folded at the elbows, and was clean-shaven. When he saw me, he nodded with an almost polite smile. No hugs, no caresses. I sat up, trying to control my nervousness. I started to speak slowly. I explained that I needed that time, that I felt the need to experience something for myself, that the love had never ceased to exist. He listened to me in silence, but his gaze was different. It was as if I were an acquaintance, a stranger. I tried to take his hand, but he subtly pulled away. It was then that he asked, bluntly, was having sex with other people part of that? I was silent. The question tore me apart inside. The answer was obvious. Yes and no, because what I did was not about betrayal, but about desperation. But that did not alleviate the pain in his eyes. I tried to explain, but he shook his head. You wanted to live something outside of me, and you did. You just did not expect me to do the same. The words were spoken firmly, without anger, but with a contained sadness that pierced me. He did not shout, he did not accuse me, he did not make a scene. And that hurt more because it was real. It was the end, naked and raw, without any spectacle. I apologized. I said I was wrong, that I did not know what I was doing, that I wanted a chance to rebuild. My eyes filled with tears. I was no longer trying to appear strong, I was begging. There, in front of the man who had loved me for 10 years, I felt small. Can we try again, please? My voice broke. My dignity had vanished. But he remained firm. He took a deep breath and looked me in the eyes. I loved you, Raphaela, but you did not choose me when it mattered most. The sentence was delivered like a verdict, and I knew there was no appeal. He said he knew everything, not just about the separation, but about the details. That his colleagues saw it, that the comments reached him, that he felt humiliated, used, betrayed. That he tried to understand it, tried to justify it, but in the end he came to the conclusion that the love we had could not withstand abandonment. I am seeing someone now, someone who has not put me on hold. When he said that, it was as if the floor had fallen out from under me. I wanted to scream, to tell him that she was not me, that she did not know our stories, that she would never understand him like I did. But I just cried because he was right. Daniel got up, left some coins on the table, and told me, take care. That was all. No scene, no drama. He walked out the door and I was left there, with the cold coffee, the smeared makeup, and the empty soul. I left the cafeteria staggering, aimlessly, walking like a zombie through the city streets. I spent hours wandering, looking at shop windows I did not see, feeling the wind hit my face like a slap. When I got back to the apartment, Mirela was watching a series while eating Doritos. She pretended not to see. I went straight to the room, threw myself on the bed, and curled up. It was the end. This time, without commas, only periods. I stayed locked in my room for 2 whole days. Mirela went on with her life, coming and going, dancing, laughing out loud as if nothing had happened. I, on the other hand, could barely get out of bed. The silence was deafening. I tried to mentally review the conversation with Daniel to find a crack, a point of hope, but I could only think of the coldness of those last words, someone who did not make me doubt. The truth is that he not only moved on, but he left me behind, without looking at me. For the first time, I felt what it was like to be truly forgotten. I went back to work, but it was as if I were absent. I did my duty, greeting my colleagues with an empty gesture. I spent my breaks locked in the bathroom, crying with my face in my hands, trying to swallow the pain. The people around me thought it was just fatigue, but it was much more. It was mourning. Mourning for a relationship that I had destroyed with my own hands. The hospital, which had once given me a purpose, became just another place where I pretended to be okay. Going home was even worse. Mirela tried to drag me to parties, but I no longer responded. It was on one of those nights of denial that I exploded. Mirela showed up with 2 friends, opened a bottle of cheap wine, and started dancing in the living room with the music at full volume. I was sitting on the floor, with a throbbing head, when I could not take it anymore. I screamed. I cannot pretend I am not dying inside while you dance. Mirela looked at me coldly. You did not lose it, you threw it away. Those words were like a punch. She was right. And it was there, at that very moment, that I knew our friendship was over. There was no going back. The next morning, she left early, and I was alone, like so many other days. I received a message from a friend from university, with a photo attached. Look who I met today at the park. I opened it. It was Daniel, holding hands with the blonde in the green dress. They were sitting on a bench, smiling. She rested her head on his shoulder, and he looked at her as he once looked at me, with tenderness, with affection, with peace. But there was something different in that pain. It was no longer suffocating, it was definitive. As if the body had finally accepted that it was over, that what was is no more and will never be again. I did not cry, I did not scream. I just took a deep breath and let the image invade my mind. They seemed made for each other, and maybe they were. Daniel was too good to wait for someone who considered him an option. I was that person. I was the pause. I was the blind spot. I closed the phone and stared at the ceiling for hours. I thought about how everything could have been different if I had talked to him before, if I had asked for help, if I had faced the tedium of routine with courage instead of throwing myself into the illusion of freedom. But it was too late. The what if does not change anything when the choice is already made. The only certainty I had left was that I was alone. Mirela, Daniel, the past, everything was left behind. And for the first time, I felt true loneliness. Not as the absence of people, but as the absence of myself. That Raphaela who dreamed of caring for others, of starting a family, of being happy with someone who loved her deeply. That Raphaela no longer existed. In her place, there were only ruins. And I did not know if I could rebuild anything with what was left. The days passed like a flash. I would wake up late, I would miss shifts, I would ignore messages from my colleagues at the hospital. I walked like a ghost. I attended to patients automatically, without empathy, without soul. I cried in the locker room, with my head resting on the metal locker, feeling dirty, empty, exhausted. My supervisor called me twice to ask if something was wrong with me. I lied. I said it was just fatigue. But the truth is that I was falling apart. My whole being was screaming for help, but there was no one to listen to me. I could not even hear myself anymore. Mirela, on the other hand, went on with her life as if everything was fine. She kept inviting people to the apartment, having loud parties and laughing out loud. When I passed through the living room in the middle of the night, there was always some guy sleeping on the couch or a drunk friend vomiting in the bathroom. What I once found fun now disgusted me. I felt like I was living in a parallel universe where decadence was celebrated. And what was worse, she did not seem to realize how much she was suffocating me. Or if she did and did not care. One night, I exploded. It was Tuesday. She came home at 2 a.m. with 3 people. She opened the fridge, turned up the music at full volume, and started drinking. I came out of the room and screamed, "Can you stop this? I am dying here and you are acting like nothing is happening." The silence was immediate. She looked at me coldly, without a hint of compassion. You did not lose it, you threw it away. Those words tore me apart. It was as if she had been saving it for a long time, as if she blamed me for everything. And maybe she was right. That same night, I made a decision. Our friendship was over. I did not say anything, I did not fight. I just locked myself in my room, packed my suitcase, and waited for morning. I left in silence. I stayed in a cheap hotel near the hospital, with a smell of dampness and rough sheets. But for the first time in a long time, I was able to sleep without hearing loud music, footsteps in the hallway, or drunk voices. Only the sound of my own exhaustion. Mirela sent me 2 messages later. "You are gone, and are you okay?" I read them, but I did not reply. And I never spoke to her again. A week later, a friend sent me a photo. She did not even need to say anything. It was Daniel with the same woman, in a park. She was laughing at something he had said. He looked at her as he once looked at me. And there, in the middle of my shift, in my scrubs, with my hands dirty with alcohol and my eyes burning with fatigue, I felt a familiar pain, but different. It was a more sober, more definitive pain. It was no longer desperation. It was acceptance. His world continued without me. And I needed to start living mine, even if I had to start from scratch, even if I had to break it, even if I had to be in silence. I took a deep breath and moved on to the next patient. My eyes were still burning, but my head was clearer. Maybe, deep down, that photo was what saved me because it forced me to accept that the love was over, that it no longer belonged to me, that my story with Daniel was beautiful, but it had come to an end. And that if I ever wanted to rebuild something, I needed to stop looking back. I was no longer the Raphaela I used to be, but I did not need to die in that version of myself either. Now it was just me. For the first time, just me. Starting over was a slow and silent process. I changed my shift at the hospital, I distanced myself from almost all my acquaintances, and I changed my number. Not for revenge, but for survival instinct. I never spoke to Mirela again. She became just a face and a blurry memory. I spent months writing letters I never sent, letters to Daniel, to myself, to the 17-year-old Raphaela who thought love was enough. Therapy was what kept me going when I could no longer distinguish guilt from pain. And little by little, the silence inside me stopped hurting. It just remained. It just resonated. Daniel became a shadow, a ghostly presence in the hallways of my thoughts. In everything I did, he was still there, a smell, a phrase, a noise. But over time, the memory became a scar. One day I went to the market near his old house, without thinking. I walked down the street where we used to walk. It was like crossing a minefield of memories, but I managed to get through it. And I did not cry. For the first time, I did not cry. Maybe then I understood that surviving the end of love is not about forgetting, but about learning to breathe with the emptiness. One day, by chance, I ran into his mother at a pharmacy. She looked at me with sweetness and said, "He is fine, very happy." I smiled. It hurt, but I smiled. I did not need to say anything more. That was the answer to everything. I never knew if the new one slept in our bed, used my favorite recipes, or laughed at the same bad movies we watched cuddled up. I did not ask either. But deep down I knew. She occupied the space that was once mine, and she did it without needing to apologize, because she did not destroy anything. I destroyed. With my hands, with my decisions, with my ego. The freedom I so longed for was an illusion, a distorted reflection of everything I thought I was losing. And the love I wasted was exceptional. It was quiet, it was sincere. But it was not enough for me at that moment. And now, when it could have been, it was no longer there. And it would never be again. To live with this is to accept one's own failure as part of the story, as part of who I am today. A woman who loved, who suffered, who lost herself, and who, above all, paid the price for her own freedom. I move on, but with scars, with memories that sometimes still ache. And with the certainty that if I could go back, I would do everything differently. I would have talked, I would have asked for help, I would have faced the monotony with courage. But instead, I ran away. I was a coward. And now all I have left is the awareness of what I lost. Not just the man, but the opportunity to be truly happy with someone who loved me beyond my mistakes, who waited for me, and who, when he realized I would not come back, finally left. Is there redemption for those who destroyed their own love with their own hands? Or is all this just the silent punishment for those who only understood its value when it was already too late?